We spend a lot of time on this show looking up, gazing out into the vastness of space. I mean, it's pretty inspiring, right?
Oh, absolutely. It captures the imagination like nothing else.
But sometimes I think we kind of forget that space, well, it's not exactly a welcoming place. In fact, it's downright hostile to human life. I mean, think about it. No air to breathe, radiation bombarding us constantly, and let's not forget about the lack of gravity.
Right, that's something we take for granted here on Earth, but out there it leads to all sorts of problems like bone loss and muscles wasting away. It's a really harsh environment for a species that evolved to live on this nice, comfy planet.
Yeah, and for decades, our approach to space exploration has been all about, well, building these little bubbles of Earth-like conditions, like sophisticated spacecraft, complex life support systems, all designed to protect us from the very environment we're trying to explore. But it makes you wonder, is that the only way? What if instead of shielding ourselves from space, we actually adapted to it? Like really adapted to it?
No, that's a fascinating question. It's a complete paradigm shift. What if, instead of focusing on technology to protect us in space, we actually looked inward and considered, redesigning humans for space?
Exactly. Forget better spacesuits for a second.
Yeah.
What if we could actually change our biology, fundamentally, so we could not just survive, but thrive in the cosmos? It might sound like something straight out of science fiction, but when you look at what's happening here on Earth with the whole biohacking movement, it starts to feel a little less far-fetched. I mean, people are already experimenting with their own biology in ways that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago.
Yeah, you're right. It's an interesting parallel. And a lot of the focus in biohacking initially was, on optimizing health, maybe pushing the limits of human performance in a terrestrial setting. But some of the things people are exploring, magnetic implants, for example, which give you a whole new type of sensory input that's pretty wild.
Oh, yeah, totally. Or what about CRISPR? That's a gene editing technique that's so precise, it's like having a molecular scalpel.
Right. And when you start thinking about those tools and techniques, you can see how they could be used in theory to actually adapt humans to really extreme environments like space.
That's it. I mean, we're seeing people like Josiah Zayner. He's a former NASA scientist. He's become a big name in DIY biohacking. He's really pushing the limits with self-experimentation, making this stuff accessible to people outside traditional labs.
Yeah. And then you have folks like Dr. Liz Parrish. She's been a huge advocate for using gene therapies to, well, fight aging, essentially.
Right, these are pioneers. They're showing us, right now, the potential for human beings to take control of their own evolution. It's pretty mind-blowing.
It is, isn't it? It's that underlying idea, of not accepting our biological limitations, but actually striving to overcome them, to transcend them. That's what's so powerful.
Yeah, and if we can harness that impulse, that drive, and direct it towards the challenges of space, well, the possibilities are, almost limitless. Imagine from sensing magnetic fields like some animals can do to maybe, resisting cosmic radiation. The key is being able to manipulate our own biology. Okay, so let's do a little thought experiment.
All right, I like where this is going.
Fast forward with me to the year 2099. Humanity is on the verge of launching its first interstellar arc. It's called the Helios Voyager, and its destination is Proxima Centauri b, a planet that might be habitable.
Ambitious, I like it.
Right. But here's the thing. Even with propulsion systems that can get us close to the speed of light, we're still talking about a 32-year journey. One way, that's a really, really long time. Now, the conventional thinking for a mission like this is, put the crew in some kind of suspended animation, maybe cryosleep, or just rely entirely on super advanced AI to run the ship.
Right, those are the go-to solutions we usually see in science fiction.
Yeah, but those ideas, well, they come with their own massive problems. Technical hurdles, ethical dilemmas, you name it. So imagine, instead, that Earth comes up with a completely radical solution. Project Genesis X.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Project Genesis X. What's the deal with this?
Well, instead of trying to keep a bunch of Earth-normal humans alive in a totally alien environment for 3 decades, Project Genesis X basically says, hey, why not change the humans themselves? Like, make them better suited for the journey and the destination.
Wow. That's a huge shift in thinking. Instead of changing the environment to fit the human, you're changing the human to fit the environment. That's pretty profound when you think about it.
It is, right. So we're talking about bioengineering humans specifically for the rigors of interstellar travel. Think gene editing to make them super resistant to radiation, developing synthetic blood that can carry oxygen way more efficiently in the low pressure of a spaceship.
Interesting. So you're not talking about creating cyborgs or robots or anything like that. You're talking about like a new type of human, a human that's biologically equipped for space travel, right?
Exactly. They wouldn't just be surviving, they'd be thriving. Now, of course, a project like this is going to raise some really big questions, like what does it even mean to be human?
Yeah, I mean, not everyone's going to be on board with the idea of messing with our fundamental biology, even if it is for something as grand as space exploration.
Right, and what about the people back on Earth? Would these space-adapted humans be seen as different, superior? I mean, could this create new social divisions?
Ooh, yeah, that's a real concern. You could end up with a biological class system almost. That's definitely something to think about.
Now, here's where things get really interesting. One of the things they discover with Project Genesis X is, well, turns out some of these space-adapted humans, they have trouble coming back to Earth.
Really? What do you mean?
Well, their bodies have adapted so well to the low-gravity environment of space that Earth's gravity becomes a problem for them. It's too much. They get sick. They can't function properly. Some of them, they can't come back at all.
That's fascinating and kind of sad, too. They've become so adapted to space, it's almost like they don't belong on Earth anymore.
Right. It's a point of no return,
Yeah.
What started as a way to overcome the challenges of space travel, well, it inadvertently created a new kind of human who's essentially bound to the stars. Okay, now let's jump even further ahead. It's 2155, and humanity is spread out. We have thriving settlements on Mars, the Moon, all sorts of orbital habitats. And something pretty remarkable starts to happen.
Okay, lay it on me. What's going on?
Well, the humans who were born and raised in these off-world environments, they start to change, biologically. They're becoming different from the humans who stayed on Earth.
Hmm. Well, from an evolutionary standpoint, that kind of makes sense. Different environments will naturally favor different traits, right? So you put humans in a low gravity environment for a long enough time, their bodies are going to adapt.
Exactly. And that's what we're seeing. There are reports of kids born on Mars having higher pain tolerances.
Hmm.
Maybe that's an adaptation to the harsher conditions there. There's some evidence of people in these off-world settlements developing different sensory perceptions, maybe fine-tuned to the specific stimuli of their environments.
Interesting. So they're not just physically different, they're experiencing the world differently too.
It seems that way, yeah. And get this, there are even some, well, anecdotal reports of people who grew up in space having faster reflexes. Maybe it's from having to navigate the complexities of artificial gravity and, living in these enclosed environments.
So it sounds like we're talking about more than just a few isolated cases. Are these changes being passed down? Like, are they genetic?
That's the thing, they seem to be. The evidence is pointing to a real genetic component.
Yeah.
So you've got natural selection shaping these off-world populations, plus the possibility of, ongoing genetic tweaks, maybe not as radical as Project Genesis X, but still, it leads to a pretty big question. Are we seeing the beginning of a new human species?
Wow, you're talking about speciation. That's huge. I mean, that's like textbook evolution in action. Humans spreading out, adapting to new environments, and eventually becoming distinct species. That's a powerful concept.
Yeah, it is. And it brings us right back to that fundamental question.
Yeah.
Are we still human if we change everything that made us human in the first place? Like, if we intentionally alter our genes, if our bodies change so much that we can't even live on Earth anymore, if our descendants become, well, something else entirely, what's left of us?
That's a really deep question. It challenges our whole notion of what it means to be human. Is it about our specific biology, our shared history on Earth? Or is it something more, something deeper? Like our consciousness, our capacity for connection, our curiosity. As we push the boundaries of what's possible with biology and technology, we're going to have to keep grappling with these questions.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in exploring these ideas further, I highly recommend checking out the work of people like Nick Bostrom. He's a philosopher who writes a lot about transhumanist values, and Dr. Liz Parrish, who's doing some really cutting-edge research on gene therapy. And for a look at the DIY biohacking world, Josiah Zayner's stuff is fascinating. Their perspectives are all really different, sometimes even controversial, but they give you a lot to think about when it comes to the future of humanity, especially as we venture out into space.
You know, this whole conversation, it's a good reminder that the human story is still being written. And as we explore the universe, who knows what we'll discover, not just out there, but about ourselves. The drive to explore, to push boundaries, it's a big part of what makes us human. And as we go further into space, we might find that adapting, changing, becoming something new, well, maybe that's just part of the journey. Maybe that's what space demands of us. And maybe, just maybe, it's what we're meant to do.